Good afternoon EDH enthusiasts, my name is Flynn and welcome to a Commander deck build video. One of my favorite exercises to do in Commander deck building is to build a new deck utilizing as many older cards as possible, and as few cards included that we would call modern staples. Nowadays, we see so many cards being designed with Commander in mind that it takes some of the fun away from digging through new sets. Commander back in 2011, when I began playing, was a much different format back then, though I'd argue that a lot of the old legendary creatures are still able to provide a fun experience. One such is Oros the Avenger, first printed in the Planar Chaos set in 2007. Oros is a 6/6 dragon with flying for 3 generic and then 1 each of white, black, and red. He has a triggered ability where whenever he deals combat damage to a player, you may pay 2 and 1 white, and if you do, Oros deals 3 damage to each non-white creature. This creature comes with some solid evasion on top of a tacked on board wipe. Oros brings a bolt to each non-white creature whenever it deals combat damage, and so this ability will be the major aspect of our deck today. Our deck's primary goal is to get out Oros and begin swinging in. This acts in some sense as a Voltron deck, but not so much in the sense that we want him to be winning us games through commander damage. That is still viable given his stat line, but we are also going to be utilizing some unique interactions that'll synergize with his bolt ability. The primary method of doing this falls onto our creatures. Because Oros will burn our non-white creatures, we can actually take advantage of this. Stuffy, a 5-mana artifact creature with indestructible, enters and chooses a player. Whenever Stuffy is dealt damage, it also deals that much damage to the chosen player. You can also tap the Stuffy to have it deal 1 damage to itself, therefore triggering its other ability. This is a cool way to take advantage of Oros burning our own creatures, as the Stuffy not only survives the damage, but will deal 3 damage to an opponent. We also run a few cards who do about the same thing. Barbservator is a 4-mana 1/1 with indestructible. When it enters, it is suspected, giving it menace and it becomes unable to block. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you draw a card and lose 1 life. But if it's dealt damage, such as being blocked, target opponent loses that much life. This is a bit more of an aggressive take on this ability, giving us incentive to attack with it regardless of if it connects or not. Your opponent will take more damage from it being blocked, but if it goes unblocked, you get to draw a card. Boros Reckoner is a 3-mana 3/3 that is actually white, so it dodges Oros' ability. It still carries the triggered ability where if it's dealt damage, it'll deal that much damage to any target. You can also pay 1 of either red or white to give it first strike until the end of turn. This one doesn't carry indestructible on it, but it does have a potent way to mirror back any damage dealt to it. Finally, we have the Brash Taunter, a 5-mana 1/1 goblin with indestructible. Whenever it's dealt damage, it deals that much damage to target opponent. You can also pay 3, tap the Taunter, to have it fight another creature. We are again going with a different approach, letting it fight another creature. It only having 1 power doesn't give it much in the way of lethality, though we can address that later by granting a death touch. But the real value here is any damage that it sustains through fighting or combat can be directed at an opponent. Since you also choose the opponent to take the damage at the resolution of the ability, you can use it on a different opponent each time, making it a bit more flexible than some of the other cards in this category. These creatures can all take advantage of Oros bolting them, and of course our opponent's creatures also are up for getting zapped. But what if we are playing against a white deck? Oros can't hit them with his ability, right? That's where Darkest Hour comes in. This 1-mana enchantment turns all creatures black and they lose all of their other colors, and since they are no longer white creatures, every creature will now be hit by Oros' ability. We also have Repercussion, a 4-mana enchantment with 1 ability. Whenever a creature is dealt damage, Repercussion deals that much damage to that creature's controller. The next aspect of our strategy will come from granting Oros Death Touch, Lifelink, or a Lifelink adjacent ability. See, we have cards like Spirit Link and Vampiric Link that both cost 1 mana to enchant Oros. They grant him the ability that when he deals damage, you gain that much life. This is not lifelink, meaning that if he has lifelink and you enchant him with one of these cards, you will gain life twice. If you enchant him with both, you'll actually get to stack the additional life gain instances. So for each creature he deals 3 damage to, you'll gain 3 life for each method of life gain. And to this end, we actually have a number of ways to grant basic lifelink. Vizkopa Guildmage has an activated ability for 3 mana that grants a target creature lifelink until the end of turn, and should you pay an additional 3, each opponent will then lose the amount of life that you've gained this turn. Should you be gaining 3 life off of several sources, that can quickly add up to take opponents out of the game. Basilisk Collar is perhaps the most useful equipment in the deck, being a 1-drop artifact that equips for 2. It gives the equipped creature both Death Touch and Lifelink. This means that on our commander, he wipes the board and gains us a ton of life every time he connects to an opponent. Since he is dealing 3 damage to the creatures, if that is not enough to kill the creature through lethal damage, the Caller giving Death Touch ensures that the creature will die. True Conviction is an old favorite of mine, but it does have a lot of relevance in this deck. Since Oros' ability triggers off of him dealing combat damage to a player, him having Double Strike means that that ability can trigger twice. You would need to pay 3 mana for each instance of the triggered ability, but that would make for a very powerful move. Our creatures also gaining lifelink means that we will be gaining a ton of life through all of our damaging creatures. Those creatures who redirected damage back at opponents will be gaining us life through this method, and if the aforementioned Guild Mage is in play and its second activated ability is live, it can easily take out our opponents. Vault of the Archangel and Witch's Clinic are 2 lands in the deck that can also be used to give lifelink or death touch to our creatures as well. So okay, we have our main strategy down, we need to make sure that Oros connects, and then we get a ton of value of it. But how do we go about guaranteeing that we connect? We actually have a number of ways to go about this. The primary way is one of my favorites, utilizing Filth in the graveyard, along with Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth in play. Urborg will turn all lands in play into swamps, which will ensure that Filth's abilities are always live. That grants our commander Swamp Walk, and since the defending player will always be controlling a swamp as long as we have Urborg in play, our commander will be flat out unblockable. We also have cards like Mother of Runes to give protection to whatever color our potential blockers may be. Our removal suite in this deck is also much more involved than in most decks. We run cards like Royal Assassin to pick off individual cards to ensure that our opponents won't have much to retaliate against us with. Hidden gems like Light Minefield can be deadly to opponents if they are choosing to swing out with their board state. Since our creatures for the most part want to be damaged, we can swing in recklessly with our indestructible cards to get additional burn in. Blasphemous Act can be brutal should we have cards like the Stuffy Doll out, as they'll be dishing out 13 damage to an opponent. Chain Reaction functions in a similar way, and it works great with our creatures to clear the board and potentially giving us some damage to burn. Portcullis can be great should we drop it after we've gotten our commander out. This is a pretty weird but brutal card, as it exiles any creatures that enter past the second creature while it's out. In Commander, this can be backbreaking, as it will largely leave the board empty. It works great for us, as we can begin swinging in with Oros or whatever else we might have in play. The only downside is it does not exile any creatures that were already there past the 2 when it entered. Pariah Shield is a unique equipment that costs 5 to cast, and then equips for 3. All damage that would be dealt to us gets dealt to the equipped creature instead. If we stick this on any of those damage redirecting creatures, we have even more protection from counterattacks and don't even need to bother blocking. Now, since I've put a very high priority on getting out the Basilisk collar as soon as I can, we do have a few ways to help us tutor for it. Open the Armory can also help us snag one of the 2 Link enchantments, but can also help grab the collar. Stoneforge Mystica can also tutor for the equipment and helps us cheat it into play. Goblin Engineer does something similar, though it pitches the card to the graveyard. We have the ability to recur that card, but it is a little bit more involved than simply playing it through the Stoneforge Mystic. Now, as a final piece of tech that doesn't really synergize directly with our commander per se, Assemble the Legion does have a very practical role for this deck. See, it makes more creatures as the game progresses. The creatures it produces are red and white, and so their white color identity will protect them from Oros' damage. There can be a secondary front in them to help us play more aggressively, as our opponents will have multiple creatures on the ground that they have to deal with, and then Oros in the air to block. I think the thing with Oros that really enticed me was the unique blend of a burn deck with a Voltron strategy. We don't really go the normal route with the Voltron build in that we only really work with a small handful of crucial equipment and enchantments. Oros has a decent enough ability tacked onto him that the small amount of protection that we will grant him through our other cards should be sufficient. This deck also takes a good amount of burn damage into account, and really doesn't have a lot besides our commander that insists it enters combat, letting us play somewhat passively to soak up hits. Oros does cost 6, which is a decent amount to get into play, making for a bit of a slower game, meaning that we do have to fall back onto cards like Blind Obedience and the Ghostly Prison to protect us from some early game attacks. Once the deck begins to pick up and our board state begins to really develop, we can quickly snowball to a point where our opponents can't engage with us advantageously. Now, if you'd like to see the full deck list, including any of the cards that we didn't mention here, I will include the link to the Minefield page where you can playtest, copy the deck to your own profile to tweak, and even mass purchase the deck if you'd like the deck as well. I think this is a really fun build that shows that even though newer commanders are more pushed for our format, we can still find some gems in some historic sets. What legendary creature would you like to see next? If you enjoyed this video, likes and shares are of course always appreciated, and if you're new here, subscribe so you never miss a new video. With that, we will come to a close on our look at Oros the Avenger. And as always, my name is Flynn. Thank you for watching.